Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. You know, I've been waiting all week to interview this woman.
It's because we're BFFs.
Yes, I know, but I was here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but
I'm
we
sorry.
finally got
I've
you.
been so busy.
No, it's okay. It's
Okay,
okay.
thank
It's
you.
not. I'll be honest with you. It's
Yeah.
not like I haven't interviewed.
I was
going
going
to
to say, it's not like you
Yeah.
haven't been busy.
Yeah, we've been interviewing
Okay.
people. Margaret Dawson, CMO at SUSECON, at SUSE. We're at SUSECON. Needs no introduction to our audience. We've been talking a lot. Hopefully we'll be talking more.
I hope so.
But Margaret,
Yeah.
I know it. Well, you're on an adrenaline rush because you
I am.
literally did keynote this
I am.
morning.
Yes.
Then another session.
Yep.
Now you stopped by here. But, you know, it's been a week.
It has.
It's only 3 days.
It's only Thursday. Wait, what
But
day
it's
is it?
been
Yeah,
a
it's
week.
Thursday. It's
Yeah.
Thursday.
Yeah, is
Yeah,
it Thursday?
yeah.
I was thinking it's Wednesday.
I know.
God. Yes. So it's been almost a whole week. No kidding
Yeah.
around. But what a week it's been. So I sit here humbly in the lobby of this with my little TV setup and talk to everyone. But you have a different view from your vantage point. I have my views. I've written about them. I've talked
Yeah.
about them. Share your views of this week.
I will share what I just keep hearing over and over from partners, from customers, which is the energy that this feels like a new day, a new dawn. And it's not that they haven't loved working with SUSE before, they have, right? And
Yeah.
every customer you talk to, which I'm sure you've talked to some, will say, you know, we continue to work with SUSE because they're a partner, they're not just a vendor, right? But there is something happening this week, and I think it's everything is coming together.
Yeah.
And so many people, whether it be partners or customers or, you know, maybe even SUSE employees, see a piece of things, right? It's almost like touching the elephant from a million,
Yeah,
right? Kind of thing. And yet somehow this week you are seeing the entire picture.
Yes.
And it's not only a more comprehensive picture, but it's a picture that allows you to see that it is ours to win. And I have
Yeah.
said that before, but I am telling you, whether it's digital sovereignty or, you know, AI infrastructure or Linux and multi-Linux manager, multi-Linux support, Kubernetes, container management, like everything feels like it's building on each other. And you can see how the future is going to play out, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that maybe were given to us, or it was timing or whatever. It doesn't matter, but there is definitely an energy here I've never felt.
Absolutely. So my friend Brad Feld has done pretty well for himself. He's a venture capitalist,
Yeah.
done a lot of things.
I know who Brad felt.
He always used to say, you know, it's good. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart, but it's good to be both.
Right.
And I do feel like this is SUSE's moment.
Yeah.
Not because you stumbled drunkenly or blindly right onto.
Were you at the party last
Yeah, I
night?
was.
Oh, sorry.
That was a great party. What a place. We can talk about
was
that
beautiful.
offline. It
Yeah,
was
okay.
a beautiful place. But
Offline.
no, but you arrive at a moment, right? And not
Right.
every company, and you know, at some point in everyone's life, we come to a moment where you can seize the opportunity and your life goes in a direction,
Right.
or you don't, and it goes in a different
Right.
direction. And you may not get that. You may not get another moment like that. It's the
Sure.
same thing in the life, I think, of corporations, of organizations. You get a moment. Opportunity knocks.
Right.
You seize it, or you let it go past. I really feel this is SUSE's golden ticket.
I agree, and we've had those moments before. In fact, I was just talking to someone when the whole CentOS, thing happened.
That was small potatoes.
It was,
though.
but it's an example of we could have done nothing,
Right.
right? And we didn't do nothing. We said, hey, the market, our customers, those users need something, and we're going to fill that. So then fast forward, digital sovereignty. A year, 2 years ago, when in Europe at least, this really started becoming, a bigger conversation, but it was very early. What did we do? We put a tiger team together. We said, go to Brussels, go to France, go to these places, go talk to people, find out what's going on, be in the beginning of the conversation. So we
Right.
were, and now we're in every conversation.
Yeah.
And we were ahead, we were first, and people are scrambling to kind of catch up. But, we've kind of taken that and run with it and are leading it, frankly.
But this,
right?
this is why I said to you before about luck, perspiration, and inspiration. It's that legwork. You didn't know what the geopolitical whirlwind is going to cause to make sovereignty, digital sovereignty, a literally a national sovereignty issue, right? A
global
geopolitical thing. It's the same thing. I mean, we all kind of saw AI coming for the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
But that's, the way SUSE has embraced the whole AI piece of this and open.
Well, and not only embraced it, but I do think there is someone to be a leader in how the different elements of the AI ecosystem look to open standards.
Yes.
I really do. And I've had so many conversations about that this week.
But seeing that connection early on, that open infrastructure, open standards is going to be a key piece of this AI. Again,
it's going to be a tension point.
Preparation, perspiration, inspiration, all those CIONs. Yes. You make your own luck, right? And that's the key kind of thing here. So,
and it's kind of like a Rolling Stone getting moss, or what is that saying? Like
that is no moss, but a snowball. You're talking about a snowballing effect.
Yeah, exactly.
These things are coming together, and they're bigger and bigger. And in the grand scheme of things, CentOS is a little thing.
Sure.
We're talking about Earth. I mean, we're talking about SUSE having the ability.
Here's what I'll say that someone said to me that I love. They said, there is a gap in the market for a tech leader in Europe, a European tech leader.
European-based.
Right.
But global.
Correct.
That's where the gap in the market is.
Correct.
There is Google, there is Apple,
Absolutely. There are a lot of there are a lot of global technology platform
There's
leaders.
7 or 8.
But if you combine things to have a European-based technology leader that is also open, I mean...
Look, there was a time Google was open, right? There was a time
Google did a lot with Kubernetes, so I've got to give them major credits. And they actually still do a lot with open standards.
They did it with Android too.
Yeah.
Sometimes they regret it, but that's another story. But all kidding aside, SUSE has the potential, the opportunity to ascend. That's why I showed you that, to ascend those peaks.
I agree.
Now,
the ingredients are all there.
Don't let it go to your head, though, kid.
Okay.
Because there's still work to be done.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think Monday my day job happens.
Exactly.
I got to catch up on email.
So let's start talking about that, though, because
okay.
One has to ask, what's next?
Well, I think we have to deliver against all of the things happening, right? Like we said, digital sovereignty is an amazing conversation. We have the right tech stack. We have the right sovereign support. We still have to be working with customers, whether it be government or private enterprise. There's a lot of work still to be done there, right? And I don't think anyone knows exactly how that's going to evolve, right? And there's a need for even open standards and the whole conversation around open source and sovereignty. So that is just underway.
AI sovereignty.
And then you've got sovereign AI. So where is AI bumping into sovereignty, right? All this stuff is things we're doing around agentic, around MCP, around open standards, around gateways, et cetera. Those are all directionally the right thing. We're putting more and more into our platform to accommodate that. We're working with a broader ecosystem. We're making it, this is the infrastructure for your AI workloads. But all of that, this is going to be the next 1 to 5 years where we really start to see production-ready AI workloads in the enterprise.
AI time, it's 1 to 2 years. 5 years, I can't even imagine.
Well,
robots
it's going to be a whole
sitting
new...
here
Yeah.
and I. But
yes, my avatar will be here and I'll be at the beach.
Exactly. Well, let's hope so.
Great. I mean, that'll be awesome.
But you still have to do the keynote. But no, seriously.
There was a robotic dog for the keynote.
I saw the robotic
so
dog.
There could be a robotic Margaret.
So I got to tell you, I saw that was Veeam's dog, or Veeam's robot. And I saw them at RSAC. They had a little man robot at RSAC who was walking around saying hello.
But did you notice that dog, like you sensed it having a personality?
Yes.
Isn't that weird how we do that?
But you don't think your AI has a personality?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, my AI knows I'm brilliant every day. I really appreciate it.
I think they all went to the same school.
I think they all went to the same school too. Who's ever training that model, God
did a hell of a job.
Because it makes up for our childhoods. We're getting validated every day.
It's funny. forget what we do with AI. One of the biggest uses of AI is
Oh no,
companionship.
do not. Oh, companion. I thought you were going to say therapy. I'm like, don't do
No,
that.
don't do therapy
do that.
because
Can we make
people
that
wind up
statement here?
dead.
Don't
Yes.
do that.
No,
Don't.
no, but
Oh,
there's
companionship.
a lot
I
of
could see
lonely
that.
people in this world.
Do you know what's so funny? Okay, your audience has to go watch this Saturday Night Live skit. It was ages ago when Alexa first came out. And it was called Alexa Silver. It was a joke, right?
Yep.
But it's still needed. And I think that's bringing to, because what would happen, it showed all these elderly people talking to Alexa and going, and then I told Velma, and Alexa's going,
Because that's all they want. They just want someone to listen to them. Hey, don't laugh. It could be us in a couple of years.
That's why you do this job.
Absolutely.
Everybody has to listen to you all day long.
You think
I'm just kidding. And you
I'm
get to
not.
talk, and you get to talk, and you get to.
You should
meet
ask my
people.
wife. She'll tell you. I like to hear myself talk.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's perfect. All right, back to
Good gig.
SUSECON.
But here's the thing, though. You know, my grandma used to tell me, they judge you by your friends. And that's another
That's
thing
true.
I wanted to mention here.
Yeah.
The SUSE can't do this alone. Digital
100%.
sovereignty is a big job.
Takes a village. It takes a big village, actually.
With big friends.
Yeah.
And, working with AWS, and I know we're going to have an
Well,
AWS
yeah,
person
you heard
shortly.
that investment number, right? AWS has invested $7.5 billion in sovereign cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a commitment.
With a B.
With a
So in today's world, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, before you know it. But
No, but
still,
I think this
$7.5
is
billion is
right,
a statement.
right.
But companies like Lenovo and companies, you could go through
Dell
all
is
of
a
them.
wonderful partner. I mean, the thing
HP.
that I looked at, and I'll go back to why is this energy so great? Why is everyone saying this is the most incredible SUSECON yet? Some of it is look who's on stage, right? We've had AMD,
Yep.
NVIDIA,
NVIDIA.
Fujitsu,
Yep.
Dell, AWS. Those are just the 5 partners that were on the keynote
I spoke
stage.
to every one of them.
There you go. You're awesome.
I'm on it.
And then you look at the ecosystem that's all around here from all over the world. I mean, I've spoken to partners from literally every country almost in Europe, from the United States, from Canada, from Latin
Asia,
America,
Australia.
from Asia Pacific, Japan, Australia. So, I mean, even though we're sitting here in beautiful Prague, this is a global event and it is a global ecosystem. And I think that's what you're feeling.
I think another thing to remember, look, we met the big guys, they get the headlines.
Right.
But the ecosystem, I spoke to, I forgot who it was.
Well, they're
runs
the ones
AI
hand to
channels.
hand with customers, right?
I know, but you've got MSPs.
Yeah.
This company, FIS, ASP, I don't know if you know them,
Yeah,
in
I
Germany.
do. I do.
They're running 4 data centers. They're an
Right.
MSSP.
Huge.
It's big. Service integrators, from the big guys to the local guys. That's the perspiration point. Putting together an A to Z channel partnership or a channel partner program.
And that's what I actually.
just the big guys.
That's right. I actually spoke to. We had a partner breakfast this morning, and I was speaking to. Goodness, there are probably 100 partners in that room.
Yeah.
And the one thing they asked us to do is, could you start bridging your partner ecosystem, because our ecosystem is now big enough. They're like, bring in an SI, bring in an ISV, bring in the
Layer
hardware
it
guy,
in.
right? And
Put
I'm
it
like,
together
oh, that
into a
is
solution group.
right. And so they're seeing the value in SUSE playing that bridge. I think we could always have done that, but I think the fact we're getting that
Not at this
pull
level.
from the partners is really exciting to me.
I'm going to tell you something else.
Okay.
Just between us.
Oh, and the cameras and the
No one's watching.
Okay.
Just the way you attacked, and I mean the word attacked, the virtualization issue. In years past, SUSE was a very polite European company who would never go after, pull the tiger's tail and say, hey, there's a reason why you need to look at SUSE virtualization. You're looking at moving off of VMware, right?
If you've got 86% of organizations looking to reduce their VMware footprint, right, we should be there to catch it and help them.
But
100%.
no, but they never had.
I know, but you got to poke the snake sometimes, as I say.
And that's a different SUSE than in years past. And I think that right there, that's a big difference that people see that. When Frank talked about
Right.
that,
Yeah.
I saw people coming down these steps behind us and walking here, and I heard them talking. It was a visceral reaction of, God damn it, I hate that too.
Yeah.
I'm glad we
Right.
could look at this. And we look it out. I spoke to partners, Veeam, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of others. Migration, right? Just a simple migration to a modernization, to a transformation.
But I think this goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. We're not just pulling the tiger's tail or whatever it is, or, kind of coming out with these new bold, assertions and plans and initiatives because we just think it's a good idea. The customers and partners and markets are saying, and not just asking, they're begging, saying, SUSE, make more noise. I need people to know who you are. Partners are begging us to say, I want to go into a customer and have them know you. So help me with that. Right?
I agree.
And so I'm like, I hear you. We're working on it. Trying.
Fortune favors the bold.
Right.
I think that's the same.
I don't know. It probably sounds better in Chinese.
Or, okay.
I'm just saying.
I was going to go
if
with...
my Chinese was better, I could say
Mike
it. I'll come back
always
with that
says in Gaelic, but whatever.
There you go. Gaelic. Well, it probably sounds good in Gaelic,
Well,
too.
fortune does favor the bold. And if that's a word, I think we could describe SUSE
And I
at
think
this
you can be
conference.
bold and still collaborative. Sometimes that word bold,
Not arrogant.
correct. And there is still a humility. And I do think this is important. That is our heritage that I think is important. And we don't want to lose that. And I think that's where that.
Well, that's part of that
interoperability-
European heritage.
And I love that. I mean, it's one of the reasons I came here, because there is sometimes that arrogance that comes with tech companies, and
You don't say.
yeah, a little bit.
I've never run into
Not that
that.
I've ever met any tech bros in my entire life.
No.
But, no,
A
but
lot of them used to be up in Redmond, but that's a whole other story.
Stop. That was just not necessary.
Well, I'm a child of the 90s.
All right.
They
Well,
traumatized me.
I'm sorry that
But
you've been
they're not like
traumatized.
that anymore, in all honesty. They've come around.
Okay.
There are others.
There are a lot of excellent big companies. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of great opportunities in my career, so I'm not going to badmouth anyone. But
No.
my point is, I think there is a balance of being bold, being courageous,
Yes.
and still being humble and knowing that it takes a village
And that's the key.
for you to get there. And I think that combination of characteristics is SUSE.
Agreed. So, Monday starts preparations for next year's
Absolutely.
SUSECON.
That's right. Get ready.
What can we expect?
I don't know. This week is kind of...
You have to top this.
I know. That's what I'm saying. So we thought we had a plan. I'm asking the team to maybe back up a little bit and rethink the plan. So in the next 2 weeks, we'll come out. You'll be the
Okay.
first to know. We'll
Promise?
let you know. I promise.
Oh, you say that to all
I
the
promise.
guys.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah. Anyway, Margaret, we're going to take like a 30-second break as we
Okay.
bring in a person here from AWS,
Great.
Manu, and we're going to continue our discussion.
Sounds good.
All right, we're going to be right back. You're watching Techstrong TV. It's day 3 in Prague. Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimel at Techstrong again. Hey, for this next session, we call it Agents plus Apps plus Chat. It features Richard Riley, who's GM of the Power Platform Marketing at Microsoft, as well as our own Futurum analyst, Diane Hinchcliffe. Diane and Richard will build upon the foundational vision of Agents plus Apps plus Chat, creating a solution-oriented view into the heart of agentic business transformation. In this session, you're going to learn how agents are enhancing workflows and redefining the architecture of business value today. You're going to hear about practical applications for agents in terms of UI, logic layer, and decision engines across business functions, everything from finance to HR to sales, and even customer service. I think you're going to enjoy it. Here's Richard and Diane.
Thanks, Alan. This is Diane Hinchcliffe, VP and practice lead for our Chief Information Officer research group, and I'm with the Futurum Group. I'm here with Richard. Richard, can you give us an introduction?
My name's Richard Riley. I lead the low-code go-to-market team at Microsoft. So that covers all of our low-code portfolio, Power Apps, Power Automate, and includes Copilot Studio, our agent building platform.
Well, it's great to have you, Richard. And what's interesting, the CIOs I talk with, they're undergoing all these changes with AI, and now agentic has arrived. And they're under this realization that they are going to have to transform their organizations using AI agents. And so I was wondering, to help them understand this, how do you define agentic business transformation that goes beyond just mere automation and is really explains kind of why it's a new paradigm?
Well, I mean, I think agents can do lots of things. We tend to think of them existing on this kind of spectrum. So you can have very simple agents on one side of the spectrum and very complex agents on the other. So to give you a bit of an example there, I would say on the left side, on the simple side, we kind of say agents that just do, regular Q&A. They're grounded on a few documents. You ask them a few questions and they can give you answers. They're super useful in certain situations. And then on the right-hand side, you've kind of got things like autonomous agents that they can work off triggers, they can run business processes, they can literally work autonomously and have very complex logic, complex instructions, and run very complex business processes. So, and then you've got everything in between. So we kind of think it really depends on who's asking the question and what they're asking, the context they're asking the question in. But it's helpful to think about these as a spectrum of things versus an agent is just the same agent.
We appear to be on the cusp of a massive wave of agentic solutions. Some are narrow, some are broad, and some are open source. What makes Microsoft's approach defensible and distinctive in the flood of agent frameworks and offerings that we're seeing show up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd probably start with the breadth of tooling that we've got. We kind of span from the very easy to use experiences that are built into M365 Copilot with Copilot Lite. You can literally describe an agent that you want. You can give it some grounding content. You can tell it to go talk to SharePoint and a bunch of other kind of content sources. Super easy to do, super easy to share. Very valuable. We then have Copilot Studio, which kind of takes that a step further. You get access to a lot more capability, including things like triggers. And then we take that an even step further when you think of Azure AI Foundry. All of these things are kind of tied together in a very integrated way. So it's very easy to move from one to the other and incorporate one or the other in your solution. So I'd say our breadth of tool set is probably number one. Number two, I would probably talk about access to data. Any customer that's an M365 customer of Microsoft has an enormous amount of kind of that tacit knowledge, that data in Microsoft Graph. We make it very easy for you to get at that, to make your agents more intelligent. It's one thing to be able to run off rows and columns in a CRM database or ERP or F&O kind of service. It's something else when you can marry that with that tacit knowledge that you've got in your enterprise to bring intelligence, much more intelligence to what the agent can do. And then thirdly, I'd say our kind of core strength in security, governance, and compliance. We've invested heavily for a long time to help customers secure and manage their enterprise data. All of that investment flows through to your investment on the Microsoft stack for agents. Agents respect all of the policy, the labeling, all that kind of stuff that you've already deployed to manage your data. If you're building your agents on the Microsoft stack, that stuff just flows through. So I say these three things are probably the three primary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so let's zoom in for just a moment. Help people understand, how do agent-powered interfaces change the way that workers interact with business systems, compared to traditional user interfaces?
There is a lot going on in the industry with how kind of apps and agents are coming together in super interesting ways. I think over time we'll see agents starting to adopt some of the app modalities that we expect from apps today. So think of a time when an agent can actually start to build an app or even just a UI, like a form, on the fly for it to solve a business process or to help you move forward with whatever the thing is that you're working with the agent on. I think we're going to start to see that show up. It's not today, but over the course of time, I do think the app modality and the agent modality will start to mix. And ultimately, if you think about it, there's a very good reason for bringing those two things together. The example that I like to use is around a procurement process. Like every company has to buy stuff. Today at Microsoft, you have to know 3 people, there's 3 different tools, a bunch of approval stuff happens. That could be the couple of apps you have to go use. That could be built into a series of agents and Copilot kind of marshalling the whole process. You could just literally ask Copilot, like, I need to open a PO for foo. Copilot could know the agents that it needs to go talk to be able to do that. There could be a legal agent to check the statement of work that you're trying to kind of work through. There could be a procurement agent that could go make sure you've got access to the right and you're hiring the right vendors. Like every step of the way, Copilot could run that whole process. You don't necessarily need to go through 3 different tools. If Copilot needs some data from you, it could create a form if needed, if it's not a conversational type of thing that it's asking for. So you can see how these things start to really blend together when you start to think about agents working with other agents and then having something like Copilot kind of manage that interaction for you.
So I'm glad you brought up talking about different agents working across the business, and that's something we call orchestration. And one challenge enterprises face is orchestrating multiple agents across different domains, finance, HR, customer service, without chaos, integration, or security issues. How does Microsoft envision enabling agent orchestration across the enterprise, and what governance mechanisms will make it all work and safe?
That's a good question. So there are a couple of things that I don't think we're particularly unique in the industry with, like supporting MCP for agents to be able to use tooling and supporting A to A for agents to talk to other agents. That's kind of table stakes these days. The thing where it starts to get interesting with Microsoft is our ability to use capabilities like Agent 365 to provide kind of end-to-end observability across all of the agents that you've got running in your organization, to the extent that you can even give an agent, an agent ID and treat it like a user. Things like conditional access, all that kind of stuff, just work. And then I also think, like, once you give organizations the ability to kind of observe and manage and govern agents, it starts to open up new kind of frontiers of where they can use agents. It allows them to think about business problems that they've had in the past that have historically been kind of unautomatable. Maybe they're too non-deterministic or too complicated to do with traditional automation tools, and apply agents to those problems. And we've seen a ton of customers kind of look at existing business processes and decompose them and figure out where they can replace certain parts of them with an agent. They don't replace the whole process, but they start to replace parts of that process. And over time, as the technology matures, as their understanding and confidence with the technology matures, they start to build out more, but also look at brand new problems that they've faced for a long time that have just been very difficult to address with technology. And that's when, if you kind of bring all of the assets together, the things like A2A and MCP, things like Agent 365, things like the security and governance and compliance capabilities that the Microsoft stack offers you, it really does let you start to look at these problems in a very different light and start to apply technology to things that you just previously wouldn't have tried to because it was too hard.
So let's talk about really getting started with agents. You've talked about agents being on a spectrum. How should organizations assess where they are and what kind of agents do they need? You talk to a lot of different customers and you have a good sense of that. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, totally. And there's no single answer to this because everybody's different. But I think it's important for people to start in a place they feel comfortable with. It's very easy to run into this too fast, not be super successful, and then feel a little bit terrified for trying to scale it. So it's actually very similar as well to the way that people in the past, over the past 6, 7, 8 years, have deployed low code. The deployment patterns that we see with things like Power Apps are very similar to the customers that we see deploying, agents in any meaningful way. And actually, the customers that have already deployed low code at scale seem to have a very familiar pattern to follow with how they deploy agents. So it really does fall into that: pick a business process. Maybe just pick one. Find the one that's the most inefficient, the most expensive, the most painful. It's creating the most work, and then break it down decompose it into its component parts, and start to figure out where you could apply agent technology to those component parts. Don't try and replace the whole thing. And I've had many conversations with customers where they think, I'm just going to replace my whole procurement process or my whole, hiring, recruitment process with an agent. Now, that may be possible, but it's really difficult. So basically, figure out what that recruitment process looks like and break it down, and then attack it in chunks. And then you'll learn what the product, the technology is capable of. You'll learn what your teams are capable of. And as both mature, you'll be able to expand it within that process and expand it outside of those two other processes as well. So it really is a journey, and most people will find their own way through it. We have a ton of best practices, guidance, patterns and practices, that kind of thing, and templates that we can share. But ultimately, every customer is different, and everyone's going to look at this differently and figure out which is the best place to start.
So when we talk about agentic business transformation, we see a lot of organizations are trying to figure out, well, how does this fit into my legacy systems, the architecture I have today? What thoughts do you have about how do we bridge that gap between the modern agent stack and legacy IT?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. The first one would be find ways to integrate. Like MCP is a perfect way. The rate of adoption for MCP has been phenomenal. So go learn about that. Go figure out like how you could stick an MCP server in front of the services that you want to expose to your agents. That's step one. And then step two is if you already have deterministic workflows, which I'm certain everybody does, there are ways you can start to pull those into things like Copilot Studio. Keep them deterministic, but build them as agents. And that's one of the great value props of Copilot Studio is you can blend this kind of non-deterministic AI agent-driven approach to workflow with very deterministic with things like agent flows. So you can actually replicate what you've got in an agent, and then over time, you can start to create, replace parts of it. So it's more AI agent-driven than deterministic. So there's lots of ways you can start to bring these two worlds together without kind of diving in or not.
Agents will become the core logic and decision-making layer in business processes soon enough. How does agents as the new logic layer change the way that enterprises think about their core systems? What are the implications there?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a meaningful change with how people interact with core line of business systems like ERP, like CRM. Traditionally today, this is kind of a forms over data type web experience. You have to go somewhere, fill a bunch of forms in, input a bunch of data, and press submit. I think fairly soon that there'll be kind of an inversion of where the IP and the logic sits. It will be less on the database and forms layer. It will be much more on the agent layer. And what that means for users is they're going to get faster access to data. They're going to get smarter answers. They're going to be able to use multiple data sources to assess a certain situation. If you're a seller, why am I sending you to our our customer service solution plus your CRM to go figure out with the customer you're about to meet whether they've got any open support tickets and they're angry at with you? Like that it should just be able to ask an agent to be able to do that. If you're a salesperson and you just got off the phone with a customer, maybe the call's transcribed, maybe there's a bunch of email traffic between you. Why am I making you go repeat that, cut and paste it, make it up again, and submit it into a CRM system somewhere? An agent should just be able to do that. So I think there's going to be that switch from people laboring away in web forms and web services to an agent proactively in many cases working with these systems and helping the salesperson or the service person or whoever else it is to get more done and be way more productive.
So how are agents enabling organizations to leapfrog traditional low-code development and go straight to intelligent orchestration?
So I'll give you a few examples. The first one is, I wouldn't exactly say leapfrogging. I would say we're using agents to make that kind of low-code paradigm even stronger. So things like the ability to use plans in Power Apps, where gone are the days where you're trying to describe an app and build an app. What you do is describe a business process. And then Power Apps plans can use several agents. There's an architecture agent, there's a data agent, and it can actually go build a business solution for you. So, and that business solution could be 2 or 3 apps, some workflows, a couple of agents. It'll actually do the end-to-end thinking. Like if you were a business architect, what would you build? versus just building an app. So that's number one. We're leveraging agents to help you build kind of better low-code solutions. And then number two, we have new capabilities in M365 Copilot, like Workflow Builder and App Builder, where someone with absolutely zero coding experience can come and literally describe an agent or a workflow. An App Builder and Workflow Builder will go build it for you and run it. And then it can store persistent data in SharePoint. You can share that with other people. You can even start to modify it. So if it's not exactly what you want the first time you kind of describe the app, you can modify and change it as much as you want conversationally. And that really does open the door to many more people being able to kind of use this technology. These aren't going to be apps that you end up running your business on. They can help a team, an individual achieve more, be more productive using AI to build apps, things like apps and workflows.
So what we're seeing as companies plan for the role of the maker evolving, where that maker has really been that low-code developer who's been using things like Power Apps to build point solutions in their corner of the organization. What we're seeing is that role is growing up, and it's becoming one that's going to take advantage of all these intelligent agents that are being built inside the organization, and now they can build new solutions that span departments and cross silos in terms of the business processes that they can integrate. And so creating higher order, more strategic solutions out of that agent landscape that's forming. And these are things that now will automate and run on their own. But is that with you see that maker still has a role, and in fact, an even more important one. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, it's a really important point. I also think IT are going to play a very important role in this as well. They'll be the ones building the MCP servers, so they can provide access to data and logic to business units that want to go build their own agents. They'll be the ones that are building the kind of high order bit agents so that business users can take advantage of those. So I think when you bring those two things together, you definitely create a total is great in some of the parts type math for customers.
So in this new world of agents, where it's the code, the AI is touching your business and your data, the concern is around compliance and security. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how does Microsoft ensure that these very powerful agents that are working with your business are following the rules and are secure?
Yeah, it comes up a lot in conversations that I have. The thing to remember, though, is agents only have access to the data that you give them access to. They also respect all of the policy, all of the governance controls that you've got over the data. They only get access to it if they are granted access to it. And I think that's fairly unique to the Microsoft stack in the sense that all of the investments that you've made on things like Purview and managing SharePoint, that kind of stuff, that all just flows through to agents. When you go outside of the Microsoft stack, you essentially have to kind of copy paste that data somewhere. And at that point, you lose all of that governance control that you once had when it was in the kind of your M365 security boundary. So it's a super important point, and one where I think we have a fairly meaningful differentiator for customers. Everything just works. I think it's fairly just pretty much as simple as that.
And so thanks so much for being here, Richard. It was great to talk with you.
Thanks, Dion. Yeah, it was a really fun conversation. I appreciate your time.
So what was really interesting to me is seeing how far Microsoft has come so quickly with agents. We see this as a whole new stack that's forming inside the organization. It was really fascinating to hear that you're spending so much time looking at how do I make agents work across the business. I think we've looked at a lot of individual automation in the past and low code, but I think it's an understanding that Microsoft has that big picture view, and it's the breadth of the tooling. It's the scope of understanding it's not just departmental. Of course, it's departmental, but it's also how do we make this enterprise wide, and how do we elevate the thinking so that we're preparing those inside of our organization to take advantage of the big shift that's happening, going from building maybe those point low code applications to orchestrating across the business. And a lot of the pieces around making agents work together, providing that security and compliance that ensures that you can do all of this safely and not constantly sweating. Am I going to go outside the security boundaries? Am I going to go against corporate policy? And knowing that all your agents can do that. It really is gratifying to see how far Microsoft has come in assembling this vision and then offering it in, no one can say this is mature yet, but, hearing about how the stories we see at your events about how far the customers are coming and already getting a lot of these things out there. So that was the takeaway I had, is just getting a sense that Microsoft is really trying to make sure that they're leading this agentic transformation.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. Let me introduce you to our guest for this segment. Well, she's been on a bunch of times. It's Hillary Barron, AVP Research, Cloud Security Alliance. Hillary, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Great. Joining Hillary and I today, he's also been with us before about 6 months ago. Todd Moore, who's VP of Encryption Solutions at Thales. That's Thales like Dallas. Raise your hand out there if you said Thales. Okay, I see a few. Todd, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Alan. It's a pleasure to be back here again with you. Excited.
Pleasure. It's my pleasure. You know what, Todd? Why don't you go first? Tell people a little kind of bit about yourself, your role at Thales, and maybe a little bit about Thales for those folks who may not be familiar with Thales.
Sure. No, Thales, a big company. It's very diverse, based in Paris, France. We do a lot of different things. The business is really split in two sides: a defense side of the business, and then we have a cybersecurity side, and that's where I'm a part of a very large cybersecurity piece of our business. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been doing this role of VP of Data Security Products for over 15 years now, and we're really helping folks protect their data, no matter where it exists, and all those different places they want to place that data around the world.
Very cool. And is your background in cyber, Todd, or?
Good question. My background, I'm an engineer by trade, a software engineer. I did a little bit of work with the U.S. government. That's why I live in the Washington, D.C. area for many, many years, and then moved into the commercial cybersecurity space, and that's where I've been since.
Very cool. Thanks for coming back here, Todd. Appreciate you. Hillary, give them a little bit of the Hillary story and CSA.
All right. So as Alan mentioned, I'm the AVP of research here at CSA. So I do a lot of things, but pretty much any publication that you see coming out of CSA, I've in some way likely had my hands on it, whether we're working it through the working groups or more recently doing some more like generative AI content. We're really running the gamut. We do research on everything from best practices and standards. So kind of just that like baseline of cloud security, but we're also doing a lot of more cutting edge stuff around Gen AI. We just announced CSAI, so a little bit of a different arm to CSA that's just focused on AI, which has been really fun. But we also do a lot around zero trust. We've done things around blockchain. So anything that touches the cloud is around the cloud or is more cutting edge technology. We've also got our mitts in that. So a lot of what I'm doing is focused on research, but CSA itself is really focused on education. So we'll do anything from releasing our research for free to the public, whether it's participating in working groups that some of my lovely analysts run, or webinars, events. We've got all sorts of stuff, local chapters. There's lots of ways that people can get involved with CSA, consume CSA's content, and just, boost their education on anything related to cloud security.
I love it. And a great job you do, Hillary. Thank you. Thank you for all you do there. CSA.org is the website.
CloudSecurityAlliance.org. Yep.
CloudSecurityAlliance.org, excuse me. And then Todd, Thales.com?
Actually, ThalesGroup.com.
ThalesGroup.com. And then under cybersecurity there. So, all right, let's get that out of the way. We did. Let us now turn into our topic of discussion. we're drowning in data.
Yeah. A lot of unstructured
Have
data,
been.
some might say.
And a lot of it is unstructured.
Yeah.
And part of it is, I think we spent the last 10, 12, 15 years trying to figure out new ways to store unstructured data and make it useful. It started a little bit with the NoSQLs, and then you had graph databases and time series and all these different ways of just give me, like the Statue of Liberty, give me your poor, your poverty stricken, and your unstructured. But now, lo and behold, like just about everything else we do, we find out unstructured data can also be a security risk.
Yeah.
Especially in the age where we talk about, data poisoning, LLM, model poisoning, data lake poisoning. So I guess we got a new survey coming out of this cloud. Was this a joint effort with Thales and the CSA?
Yes. Yeah.
The joint alliance. And Thales on the rise in unstructured data and the risk that it presents. Who wants to go first here and explain to me, hey, why now? Right? What made us decide we need to look at this now? Because to me, this has been a problem.
Yeah, I think just to kick things off, I mean, yeah, we've known it's been a problem, but I think the amount of growth that we've been seeing, and it's kind of that like dirty little secret that organizations have in the corner. We don't really like pay attention to it. And so we can kind of ignore it. And we're like, well, all the stuff that I can see, I'm securing really well. So I'll just ignore that little laundry pile over there that I don't want to deal with. And that's only going to get worse with the introduction of AI generated content. So the volume's only going to increase. And so it's really like, okay, we need to get a handle on this, get the basics down now, and really take a hard look at how long have we been ignoring this problem and how much visibility do we even have in our organizations to this problem?
Fair. Todd?
No, I fully agree. I think that, asked why, the advent of AI and the use of AI over the last 3, 4, 5 years is really just creating a lot of this unstructured data, as you'd mentioned, Al. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you think about the number of prompts, responses, you think about the models and what we're doing with those models. And, the questions we're asking and the summarizations we're doing is creating all this new unstructured data. And with agentic AI, we're actually asking agents, machines to go out on our behalf and to create these new documents, these new photos, these new summarized versions of documents, and they're placing it all over the place. And that's all really just unstructured data that's just exploding. I think years ago, it was simple, as you alluded to, that everybody put all their critical data in a database and they made it really secure. They put a big wrapper around there and they watched it. But they always knew about, Hilly, like you're saying, there was a pile of dirty laundry sitting over there. That pile's getting really big now because, you've lost control where that data is going, who's creating it, and just where it's showing up all over the place, on-premise, in the cloud, within SaaS applications. It's kind of exponentially crazy at this point in time.
It's funny. AI, I agree with you. AI is probably at the root of a big bump in unstructured data. Not that it was small before. It's also the more code, more vulnerabilities, more everything, right? And I think one of the biggest issues we're having with all the AI stuff is scaling to AI scale, right? And we need things that are going to get us there, and it's not easy. It's not easy. But I was thinking of along these lines, and forgive me for being a simpleton, but do we have a hoarding problem? Do we really need to be keeping all this unstructured data?
I mean, that's a good question for a lot of organizations. Maybe we need to be taking a really hard look at all the data that we're collecting. I think some of it, back in, back when I first got into cloud security, they were like, oh, data is the new oil. This is everything. Right. We can make so many connections with it. But yeah, a lot of it's unstructured. So, I think we need to start asking some hard questions about what we're collecting. But Todd, I'm sure you have a lot more insight into what all people have in their unstructured data.
No. I think the short answer is we got to get rid of some of it, right? That's got to be one of the, remediation actions. You keep data as long as you need it. It's valuable. I mean, regulations sometimes say you have to keep it for, a period of 15, maybe
Yes.
20, 30 years. But, realistically, you don't need all this data. So you got to be looking at that. That's got to be part of your full data lifecycle and removing what's in scope and what's not in scope. But I think visibility is the key to your question. We just don't know what we don't have. I mean, when you talk to CISOs and board members and C-level, they really don't know exactly their problem at this point in time. So you can get rid of it once you know about it, but reducing that pile of dirty clothes, I think, Hillary, as you said earlier, you got to really know where those dirty clothes piles are before you can start, getting rid of some of those clothes or that data.
So,
yeah, they're popping up in the kitchen now.
I know.
Yeah, no, but I got a rule in my house. If there's a box in the garage or in the bedroom or somewhere, a container that hasn't been touched in a year or a year and a half, it's out. Because we don't have basements in Florida. I got nowhere to store it. I already have a storage place I pay every month from my children's, my adult kids' children's clothes that my wife doesn't want to throw, not clothes, mementos or whatever, that she doesn't want to throw away. I don't need to be doing that with my data. This reminds me, years and years ago, I was at a company, a small company at the time called Splunk, had just come out. And they had the coolest sayings on their black t-shirts. I used to love collecting Splunk shirts. And you'd go over and I was amazed. You mean I could collect that? You mean there's a log for that too? I can get all these logs? Oh, I'm going to collect that. I'm storing this. I'm storing that. And it was all fine and dandy. And I'm going to send it into my SIM. I'm going to know everything until you got your storage bill. And then you're like, screw this. I can't afford to be keeping this stuff. And I had to start making hard choices about, well, what's worth keeping? And that may not be a bad exercise to go through, right? What's worth keeping? What's worth keeping? But you guys did this joint survey around this. Let's, play a little Family Feud. Survey says, what does the survey say? Todd, why don't you go first?
Well, I would defer to Hillary for the actual numbers and details, but it pretty much says that only, a third of us know where our data is and, how it's being protected. I think of a little bit more than that, don't even know what the classification of the data is. Let's say you even know where the data is. You don't even know if it's important to you or not important to you. So it's really, again, about understanding, where this data is, where it's popping up, and then really understanding if it's important to you or not. The numbers are pretty low there. This survey is pulling out that there's a rise of unstructured data, and just really having your arms around what it is and how it's going to impact you is pretty low. But Hillary, I'm going to defer over to you now because I think you have the actual numbers and the details. I'm talking a high level. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of what we've kind of found, if we were to break it down super simple, the data's exploding. Organizations can't see it. They think they're kind of securing it because they feel pretty confident about it. But when we look at their tools, processes, controls, they're not really scaling with the problem. And then AI is being layered on top of that. That's like the quick and dirty. That's what we really found with the survey. And I think to just kind of like back up and actually talk about the specifics, there's a lot of organizations, nearly a third, are saying that unstructured data drives over half of their data growth. And that's just what they're aware of. That's something important to remember. This is what they're aware of, because when we look at industry benchmarks, we're like, they might be underestimating the volume that they really even have. So we've immediately got a visibility problem, which is probably why we're seeing some of those issues with 75% are like, yeah, I'm moderately to highly confident that I've got this thing in the bag. I've got it secured. And then we ask them about what they actually are doing to secure it. And they're like, well, I'm kind of struggling with visibility and I'm not really sure. I've got all these different tools and they kind of do like a little bit here and there. And we're like, okay, well, that's not really getting you the full picture. One thing that really like stood out was that a lot of them that they're scanning in practice just wasn't it wasn't built for their operations. Like, it just doesn't move fast enough to scan for vulnerabilities. And so it's, we've got a lot of tools in place. We're kind of piecemealing something together, which is great. We've got to start. But yeah, we're trying to use a lot of different tools, and we're not getting that full picture and getting that full visibility into everything that's going on. And then AI is kind of this double-edged sword that's coming in, because yay, it can maybe help us, which is great. But, we've got some kind of weak foundations that we're building this off of. So, we need to get some of the foundational issues under control, because, back to the point we were making earlier, AI is going to increase the amount of unstructured data that we're dealing with. And it also is enabling bad actors. So, it's like both a help and potentially a hindrance, depending on how we're looking at it, how we're using it.
I agree. So I think this is a common thing we're seeing with AI. AI creates the problem, but it's also the solution. It's the question and the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like alpha omega stuff, but it's not quite that. So I always ask people when it comes to these surveys, though, what surprised you? What didn't you have on your bingo card? Hillary?
I think, for one of the things that really stood out to me was that organizations were prioritizing lifecycle management at almost like 2 times the rate that they were looking at lineage and ownership. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because I feel like they're focused on managing the data, but maybe not necessarily understanding it.
Tom?
Yeah, no, on my side, I guess, and Hillary, you just mentioned it about the number of tools that folks have in their organizations to get the visibility. It's surprising to me that, folks have, I forget the exact number, 8, 9 different visibility tools running in their systems, and then they're still not able to get their arms around this, because either the tools aren't talking to each other, they're giving their point solutions, it's not working. So it almost feels like, there's like Alan, you would say, we need AI to solve AI. There's got to be a better way for folks to really get their arms around what's happening and then really do something about it, right? I mean, I almost feel like, what was surprising to me, that even if you had the visibility, a lot of organizations didn't know what to do next. They weren't actually doing anything about it from a protection perspective. And I think that, being able to process your data, whether that's using a control like tokenization or encryption, do more of that, so that when AI does access the data, you make it a little bit harder for them to get, the actual data itself. So just some of those things were a little surprising to me, the breadth of the problem and the fact that people are throwing point solutions at it, but not really finding a right answer today.
Fair enough. We were kind of playing catch up before all this AI came around. And I think we acknowledge that AI, and the numbers show it up, AI's accelerated this. And yes, we're probably going to have to use AI to close that gap. But, and I don't know if you asked this question in the survey, do people feel like one day we're going to get a handle on this, or is this just, status quo? It is what it is. We're just going to try to be resilient, which is the word of the week, right? Resilient.
Yeah, we did
Tom?
ask that in particular in the survey. But I think that what we saw a lot of is like trying to just get good enough. I think they're really focused on the basics. There's a lot of the basics that they're just not even getting down. So it's hard to ever feel like
I know.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Well, no, it's hard to fly like the eagles when you're still, roosting with turkeys.
Yeah.
And a lot of our unstructured data, discovery, security, etc., processes in general is, I think Todd hit it best. If you don't even know it's there or where it is, it's like dark matter, right? Somehow it's keeping the galaxies together, but I can't really put my finger on it. Guys, we're almost out of time. Where can people get more information on this and dive deeper and maybe get their own houses in order?
Yeah, so the report itself is posted both on the Thales website and then also at CSA. So if you go to cloudsecurityalliance.org, you'll be able to find it under our publications. It's the Rise of Unstructured Data Survey report.
Very cool. Was this the first year you've done this one?
It's the first time that we've done this topic, but we've worked with Thales before on,
I know you've
other
worked with
topics.
Thales.
Yeah. So
Any
we're
any plans to continue this particular one year in and year out to see how this market or how this potential problem is?
not yet, but I'm sure we will.
Oh, there you go. That's
I
an
think
idea.
the problem's out there, and we've got an opportunity to build upon what we started this year, Hillary. So looking forward to working on this topic again in the future.
That would be great. Todd, on TalusGroup.com, where would they go to find this?
You go to the TalusGroup.com website, the homepage. You can do a search for unstructured data. You'll find the report that Hillary mentioned. You'll also find a bunch of, best practices, reference designs, product solutions of, ideas of where we think we could help in that area. So I would just use the search bar within the homepage to get there. If you really want to go dig a little bit deeper, you can always look for cybersecurity products within the Talus website as well, too.
Very cool. Guys, thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing with us here on Techstrong TV. Hope to see you again soon. I don't know, maybe Black Hat in August or something. We'll be doing videos on the floor there, so look for us. Hillary,
Wonderful.
It's great seeing you. Tom, great seeing you as well again. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be back. Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. I want to introduce you to our next guest. His name is Colin Soutar. Colin is the Global Quantum Cyber Readiness Leader at Deloitte, and he was one of our initial Quantum Security 25 list members. I was going to say nominees, but we actually announced the finalists, the winners, and he was one of the list members. So you could bet he probably knows a thing or two about quantum, and we're going to talk to him about it. Let's welcome him first. Hey, Colin, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me here.
It's my pleasure. Colin, before we jump into quantum and what Deloitte is doing with quantum and everything else, let's hear a little bit about your journey to quantum, if you will.
Yeah, interesting. So, I started off in emerging technology in biometrics way back in the mid 90s. I did a 2-year postdoc at NASA and then started with a company, ended up being called BioScript out of Toronto, Canada. And we were one of the early pioneers of biometrics. And so I saw the interaction between such emerging tech, potential regulations, how public reacts to it, and so on firsthand. In fact, after the tragic events of 9/11, I helped NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, to develop national and international standards for biometrics. So I've sort of watched emerging tech evolve before in the backdrop of frameworks, regulations, standards, and so on. So about 6 years ago, when Deloitte started looking at the topic of quantum, both sides of the quantum coin, we would say, the use cases and the applications of quantum, as well as the cyber implications, which I lead globally, we started looking at that, and it was a good choice for me then to lead that, given that background. And so I've been doing that for the last 6 years, as I mentioned.
Excellent. Excellent. It's interesting, right? I mean, from emerging tech to, and quantum may be the ultimate emerging tech, as we say. Colin, a lot of people look at Deloitte and say, okay, they're advising the biggest companies in the world. Deloitte does a lot of things, but what do they got to do with quantum? How important is quantum to them?
Well, like I mentioned, there's the two sides of the quantum coin, right? There's the applications, simulation and modeling. My colleague Scott Buckholz has been leading that for the same time as I have, and we've worked together very closely. So he's looking at those applications of the quantum computer, and that helps our global clients align on how to get value out of quantum computers. And in fact, they're getting value out of modeling techniques, that are sort of quantum-like or using quantum thinking. In other words, based on the physics that quantum computers will operate under. And they're already seeing some benefits there in terms of the efficiency of algorithms. On the other side, we are concerned that our clients, especially global clients, but all of our clients, are able to essentially put the cyber risk aspect to bed and not have to worry about it in the long term. Really, what we're talking about, the good news is to mitigate the threat of a cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer being able to break asymmetric cryptography. We're looking at the mitigation being a classical algorithm, essentially. It runs on a normal machine, right? And it runs on a classical computer. And those have been out, as I'm sure you're aware, for almost 2 years now. It's August 13th, I think, 2024. And so we are trying to help our clients navigate that transition in a fairly straightforward way with all the different dynamics that are going on around third parties, supply chain, all the steps that they have to take, and so on and so on. We want 10 years from now, we want our clients to look back and say, well, we dealt with the cyber risk aspects and things were fine there. We're still interoperable with all of the business partners that we need to be. And then on the other side, we're getting all this value out of using quantum computers. So those are the main reasons that Deloitte is looking to drive this industry forward.
Absolutely. And, at some level, though, you've got to think that, hey, Deloitte is a company that other companies and organizations and governments and everyone else looks to for thought leadership, for guidance, right? It's a big part of the business. And you would almost be negligent at some level at this stage of the game, not to have your eye on the quantum price, so to speak, and on the market and what's going on. Speaking of the prize, I mentioned you were one of the initial Quantum Security 25 list members. And I mean, I don't pretend to be an expert in quantum security or anything quantum. Maybe it'd be very quantum of me to say I both pretend to be and don't pretend to be. But in any event, um, looking at the list, it was certainly chock full of a lot of distinguished folks who, have made their mark in this industry. Some because of their technical expertise, some because of their business expertise, some both. But really, the idea behind the list was to call out the fact that, hey, this is no longer a 5 to 10 year out thing, right? For too long, when we discussed quantum, it was always, yeah, it's going to be really big, but it's 5 to 10 years out. And no matter, and then 5 years later, well, it's still 5 to 10 years out. It's kind of like nuclear fusion has been like this my whole life too, right? The idea of harnessing the power of the sun to cure our, solve our energy needs and so forth. It's always 5 to 10 years out. But now it looks like we're not in that 5 to 10 years out. Q day, the proverbial Q day, as they call it, might be within our grasp. There are several organizations, more than one, saying 28, 29, certainly by 2030, um, we will have achieved Q day. So where do you sit on that divide, Colin? What do you think?
Well, there's a few things in there. So let me unpack that just a little bit. First and foremost, on your introduction there around, a firm like Deloitte and doing the right thing. It's actually something that stuck with me as I've traveled around and talked to different CISOs of large organizations, a lot of financial institutions, and try to help them through this journey. I remember having lunch with one of our senior leaders in innovation, and she remarked and said, we're very fortunate as a firm that we're able to invest in certain areas and help our clients do the right thing, right? Because this was 4 years ago or so, and even at that point, there were still a lot of people that were saying, maybe this doesn't ever happen. Maybe we don't need to worry about this. But we as an organization had enough concern to say, no, we need to try and get some messaging out there that is coherent, candid, non-calamitous, right? The world is not going to fall apart as long as we take the right steps. And so we are trying to do that and have been trying to do that for the last 6 years or so. In terms of dates and predictions, I think we've been consistent throughout the journey that we've had in saying that it's less about a date and it's more about making sure that one is prepared for when this threat materializes, right? And I personally think that there's being a little bit of over fixation, over indexing by industry on harvest now, decrypt later. I'm not saying that it's not a real threat, but I think where it gravitates people's minds to is more around the confidentiality of data, and personal information of course is very private. We want to retain that privacy. But at the end of the day, the actual impact that a crypto-analytically relevant quantum computer would have on commerce and business operations is that every single point of mutual authentication, where devices come together, people come together, all of the online communications that we do, that will be eroded. The trust, the bedrock of trust that we have in that is going to be a huge implication. And so you think about that. When is that going to happen? What's the probability it's going to happen? And you look to experts like Michele Mosca. And by the way, I feel very blessed to be on the same list as people like Michele in terms of the top. So thank you very much for that honor. It really was a privilege. You look at the predictions that he's working with different experts around the world. In fact, they published in the report that came out, I think it was at the tail end of last year, and he just briefed on it at a conference. There was actually less variability as time went forward, as people think. I think it's one of those sort of almost throwaway lines where people say, yeah, it's always 5 to 10 years away. But in actual fact, if you look at the predictions that were made every time, there's a reasonable alignment in terms of when they thought that was going to happen. And so at the end of the day, what I say to our clients is, if there's a finite probability that this is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and you can pick whatever that probability is, 50%, 100%, 10%, the impact is so significant that you want to make sure that you're well prepared, right? And whether it's going to take 5, 10 years to do the upgrades, some people say more than a decade. I heard a presentation recently by a very well-respected bank and I asked at the end of the presentation, what do you think the average will be? And they said 8 years, right? That's their opinion but it was a very sort of diligent set of steps that they'd worked through. So to me, whenever there's enough proximity of the time that it will take to upgrade versus the time at which you think this threat is going to materialize, then it's time to act, right? That's the way that we look at it. Because by the way, Q Day, again, I'm not a big fan of Q Day because the impact that will be suffered, especially from economic means in terms of that lack of trust, that's likely to be well before the world knows that it exists, a cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer, which a lot of people define as Q Day. And so we are more concerned again about being ready in advance of that day, whenever it is.
I have a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, in terms of the harvest now, decrypt later, to me, that information is radioactive in that it has a half-life, right? Every period of time, it becomes less and less. Over every period of time, it becomes less and less useful because some of the information, I'm not going to say it's eternal, some of the information has a longer lived kind of thing, maybe your social security number or something like that. But the overwhelming majority of this information that's been pilfered, harvested now and to decrypt at some point in the future, we see it here with our email list. Over time, the average email, it's almost ephemeral, right? In terms of the useful life of that information, it truly is radioactive. And so if you told me you were harvesting stuff years ago, by the time you get, first is having a computer that is as you say, is capable of doing it. Then B, it's getting access to that computer with your Harvest Now payloads or your Harvest Then payloads to decrypt them now. And that's another time frame. I think by the time that happens, a small percentage of that information is actually going to be really, really valuable. On the other hand, as you mentioned, the withering of trust, just a simple handshake. I go to a website. I'm me, it's it. This is really that website. I think that starts ripping at the fabric of what we've built here in the web and the internet. The good news is I think that is something that NIST and the industry have sort of gotten not in front of, but they're not as behind as we've seen in other technology sort of innovation cycles, right? They're out there, they're pushing, certificates to expire faster so that you need to upgrade and hopefully, these certificates you're upgrading to have post-quantum algorithms built in. Um, you know, people are becoming more aware that a good partnership, it seems, still between private industry and government here in terms of tackling that core issue. Um, so maybe I'm just a damn fool optimist, but I'm hoping this is one that we can kind of get in front of.
Well, the thing is that if you never get started, you don't give yourself the latitude of being an optimist, right? And that's sort
Yeah,
of our overall perspective. It shouldn't really be a game of hope. Um, and by the way, when we have often found that, again, sort of taking a step back, sure, quantum is the threat that we talk about here, but some of the cryptographic governance techniques, the policies, just even having a cryptographic center of excellence or, a clear line of responsibility with an organization, those are big steps forward that one could argue should have been taken over the last 2 or 3 decades. We've been kind of lucky in that asymmetric cryptography to date has stood the test of time. So we are, or I should say, the variants that have been used. We are definitely seeing that, and we're positioning this much more as cryptographic governance and starting to try and, you asked earlier about Deloitte specifically, and we obviously have an audit practice, and we need to be, we are at arm's length from the audit practice in terms of independence. However, some of the preparation, internal audit readiness activities, getting customers and clients ready so that they're able to address this problem, we're starting to look now more towards, can that be done in essentially a self-regulatory way? Our concern, and we talk to regulators quite often and around the world, our concern is that there may not be a clear enough message that the regulators want to put out there in time, and organizations may be waiting for that before they can get the proper attention at the board level. So we're trying to drive industry momentum around essentially self-regulation. And we put out a profile to the NIST cybersecurity framework. I had the pleasure of helping NIST to develop that back, 13 years or so ago now. And that stood the test of time as a reasonable outcome-based process to determine what cyber capability should look like. Well, applying that logic to cryptographic resiliency is what we've taken the next step. When we published a profile, I'd love to see industry more generally take that on board, and then organizations can activate against that and say, okay, tell us what else we need to do, because we think we've taken good steps here. This is not going to be a straight do A, B, C, and D, and we're done, right? That's the thing. It's a dynamic environment. And so it's very important, we think, to put out some sort of line in the sand there that people can address.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Colin, these are 15-minute interviews and we're about out of time. But for people who want to maybe follow you, follow the practice at Deloitte, stay abreast of this, what's your best advice for them?
I think we will continue to be out there advocating that it's good to get started. We're not being alarmist, but we are saying you should start now. You could always put it on pause a year from now, 2 years from now, but getting started now allows you to figure out where are the most important assets and business processes, mission critical operations that you should address initially. And don't get overly distracted, as I said earlier. Harvest now, decrypt later. And I sort of look at that in two areas: personal information, as you talked about, and then also national security information. So national security information clearly has high significance and should always be protected to the utmost degree. I think as we go forward over the next 5 to 10 years, the way that we authenticate ourselves as individuals is going to modify a little bit too. So there'll be other means by which to protect that information. The bigger impact is going to be on the erosion of trust by not having these mutual authentication channels that we've relied upon today. And that ultimately comes down to interoperability between organizations that want to do transactions together. If 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 have upgraded and the sixth one hasn't, will that sixth one still be trusted? Can they still do business together? That's where it's really going to hit operations.
Yeah. And it'll be lumpy. It'll be lumpy for sure.
It's not going to be straightforward. Yeah, that's for sure.
Colin, thank you for coming on and talking to us a little bit about this real issue. Congratulations again on being selected in the Quantum Security 25 initial list. Keep up the great work, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Colin Soutar, Global Quantum Cyber Readiness Leader at Deloitte, and one of the initial Quantum Security 25 list members. We're going to take a break on Techstrong TV. We'll be back in a moment.
The security world is all abuzz about the secrets behind Anthropic's Mythos model. Will it uncover more exploits? Will it make our jobs redundant? Or will a group of people on Discord use it to generate web pages? In this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, we're busting all the myths around Mythos. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where we bring together a group of IT technical experts to discuss a single idea about key concepts in the industry. This podcast features a variety of perspectives from members of the Tech Field Day delegate community and is often associated with one of our events. Tech Field Day is a part of the Futurum Group, and this podcast is also published on our sister company's website at Techstrong TV. On this episode, as we head into Security Field Day, we will be discussing the latest security AI models. But before we do that, let me introduce our guests, starting with Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Lopez from InfoAdvisors. I'm a data governance and data security expert, and I'm based in Toronto.
Yeah, hi, Brett Wolmarantz. I'm a staff solution engineer at Kong and based in the greater Southern California area.
Hello, folks. Jack Poller, Principal Analyst with Paradigm Technica.
And of course, I am Tom Hollingsworth, Event Lead for Security here at Tech Field Day. Let's jump into today's episode. No doubt you have been paying attention to the news as of late, and you've seen all of the hubbub about Anthropic's Mythos model. One of the things that we've seen a lot about is how it is too powerful to be shared with regular users. And that led to the creation of Project Glasswing, where only some 40 or odd companies were given access to it. But as we found out in the last week of April, more people had access to it than that. And on top of it all, Mythos might not be quite as powerful as we had originally thought. So in this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, we are going to be busting the myths of Mythos. So let me kind of set the stage for everybody. So Anthropic has been talking a lot recently about security vulnerabilities. And the first hint that we heard about this was a couple of months ago when Claude Opus apparently uncovered a significant number of vulnerabilities in a lot of software packages. And some of that information was released on the internet. We covered that on the Security Boulevard podcast a while back. And it led to the creation of an entirely new model called Mythos that was specifically built to find security vulnerabilities. But the first that we heard of Mythos was when it was released to a small community subset, and the press release that we got about Mythos and its associated focus group called Project Glasswing was that we were never going to get access to it because it had found dozens, if not hundreds of vulnerabilities in much of the software that's being run on the internet, things like web browsers and security packages and servers and all kinds of things. And a lot of companies that were given access, like Google and some of the other Fortune 500s, or actually it was more less than that, it was probably more like the Fortune 20, suddenly were scrambling to try to use it to uncover all these vulnerabilities. I kind of want to throw this out to the panel to start with this point of discussion. Do you feel like the hype around what Mythos was trying to find was justifiable, or was it overblown when we started learning that Anthropic had essentially created a security nuclear weapon?
Well, I think it was a little bit overblown, and it really depends on your perspective of whether you are a product developer or just a regular company that is implementing all the tools that everybody else gives you. If you're a product developer, this is a really good tool that enables you to find vulnerabilities in your own products a lot easier than waiting for somebody, a malicious actor, to figure it out and research it, or devoting tons and tons of engineering bodies, throwing bodies at the problem to find it. On the other hand, if you're just a regular company that's using products, say from Cisco or from Amazon or all these other things, or for instance, one of the big bugs was OpenBSD had a vulnerability that was 20 some odd years old. But if you're using that, the problem isn't finding the bugs; it's closing them and mitigating those securities. So that's where it becomes really a weapon, is how do you solve for those vulnerabilities before the attackers exploit it in your environment.
My take on it is kind of related to the fact that if we, meaning allegedly white hats on our side, don't build tools or techniques like this, then the attackers and the bad actors are going to develop those things too. So why wouldn't we take the preemptive strike of trying to run these things against vulnerabilities so that we know about them?
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room is a lot of folks are dismissing, Mythos is kind of overhyped, and but I think some others of us really take it as valid, legitimate, and very concerning. And there's more evidence starting to emerge now that it is very valid. So there's a bit of a rush to judgment going on here, and a sort of perhaps reluctance to really just embrace AI within vulnerability research, perhaps. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that kind of gave me pause was an article that was shared with me by Stephen Foskett that came out about 10 days ago. And one of the things that was going on was one of the researchers pulled the system card that was released alongside of Mythos and started doing some work on it. And one of the things that they found that was actually kind of interesting was, for example, in Firefox, they found was it like 180 vulnerabilities, working exploits that were capable of being used. Except when they actually went through and looked at everything that was listed in this particular little card, they noticed that there were two specific exploits that were being used as basically the entry point into the system. And every other, like almost all of the remainder of those kind of branched off of those specific two exploits, which by the way, were patched in Firefox last week in a nightly build. And when they reduced that, it went from 181 down to 20 something. When you filtered out those two, basically think of them as like the linchpins, everything else disappeared because the system was doing a lot of vulnerability chaining. And that's one of the things that I've heard, not only from the original run of this with Opus, which we'll talk about in just a minute, but through Mythos and everything else, is that AI is getting really good at doing vulnerability exploitation through chaining. So like, Jack, to your point, it found a very old vulnerability in OpenBSD. The trick is, can I use that then to get a foothold somewhere else? Because that's kind of how attackers think. We know this as security professionals. If I can get access to a system that's unintentional, what can I chain off of that? If I can get into the IIS, can I use that to gain access to Active Directory? Or God, I'm dating myself by saying that, but that's what they're seeing now. But the thing is the numbers sound scary to people. Oh my God, Firefox has 180 vulnerabilities. No, it has like 7 that can then be used to leverage to be doing other things. So if you can knock out like 3 of them, 90% of your attack surface just disappears, because I believe it was a JS shell exploitation that was the one that was like causing all of this problem. And again, kudos to the people at Mozilla. As soon as they figured out that that was a problem, bang, we can get that patched out real quick, which is what you want as a response from a security group. So do you feel like maybe some of the press around Mythos was inflating things to make it look more impressive than it really was? Or should experts in the field be concerned about AI's capability to do this attack chaining?
But that doesn't, just because how you count it doesn't make the results any less valid. And in fact, if you're doing chaining, the fact that you close the beginning of the chain or one link in the chain doesn't mean the rest of the chain is no longer a problem. It's still a problem, because if somebody can find another way into the rest of the chain, then you still have a problem. So you still have to fix those other 180 items that are behind the first 2 or the first 5 or the first 7. You maybe have more time to fix them, but you still got to fix them. They're still valid vulnerabilities that you just, that maybe they're unreachable today, but that doesn't mean they will be unreachable tomorrow.
So I agree with that point, Jack. The trade-off on the other side, though, is I'm uncomfortable with somebody announcing there were 1,000 vulnerabilities discovered in something, because to me, that's just drawing attention to whatever product it is. And I think it should be treated just like reporting bugs, is that you let people know first, and then if they don't respond, then you can make that public. And again, because people misunderstood. Like, I think all of us have been in a situation on a project where some outside quality assessment company or consultant has come in, and they immediately tell the executives, I found 1,000 errors in their code or their database design. And it turns out 500 of them was because they had a typo in what they ran, and 400 were because they didn't understand what those things were, and so they made an assumption about it. And then the last few might be errors, and it might be amongst a trillion different things that they evaluated.
Well, that's why bug counts in software development are sort of a meaningless metric, right? For that reason, right? The severity is important. Impact is important. Timeliness is important. All of those other things factor into account. I think when I think about, is Mythos overhyped or overblown? I mean, Anthropic's job is to hype their products, right? That's what they're going to do. They want people to pay attention. They want the press, and that's fine. It is very clear that one of the advantages the AI has versus the human attacker is, well, a couple things. One is it never sleeps, and it works much faster, and it can try a whole bunch of different permutations faster than humans can. Doesn't mean humans won't get there eventually. It just means that we get there faster. So you can take is it overblown? Well, yeah, they're supposed to make hay and make noise about it, but on the other hand, do organizations that have vulnerabilities in their product, could they consider this another tool in their toolbox to help them with their development efforts? And I think, yes, they can. And I think it has a lot of value there.
So let me throw a little monkey wrench into this problem, because one of the things that was discussed was that Mythos was essentially built to be this super vulnerability scanner. So in the article that I'm reading from that we'll link in the show notes, one of the things that this particular researcher did was he said, okay, well, I'm going to have Claude Sonnet look at this as well. Guess what? Claude Sonnet found the same two major vulnerabilities that were being used as the roadmap for all of these other exploit chains. The only difference was that Sonnet could not close the gap when it comes to exploitability. So it knew there was a problem. It just didn't know where to build out from there. So I think that the way that Mythos is being marketed as this super system to go out and find these problems and do something with them falls apart when Sonnet is just as capable of finding things. It just doesn't know how to run with it when it comes to an exploit arena. So are we maybe barking up the wrong tree when it comes to doing a specific AI model trained to do security vulnerabilities? Are we burning a lot of forests and water for not much advantage?
I think there's two or three different segments of the cybersecurity industry that are essentially trying to do the same thing, unaided by AI. There's an entire division, domain of red teaming, where you go in and try to act as an attacker and attack your own environment or your own products. There's another variation of that, which are vulnerability scanners looking at your environment for what we know about already, and can those vulnerabilities be exploited in your particular situation. And then there's another variant, CTEM, continuous threat exposure management, which is a combination of knowing what vulnerabilities you have and doing automated testing of those, essentially automating the red team environment. And all three of those different domains in cybersecurity are working rapidly to apply AI to what they're doing. So how is this different than that?
And I want to see these types of technologies deployed because I sit in the development stream mostly, not the production side. I want developers to be able to do these things. Like we have rough tools now, like to find SQL injection and the basics and misconfigured things. But I think if we get it into the developer or the product teams, wherever you are, they will also learn about the vulnerabilities and maybe stop developing more of them in the future. So, there's a need in production once things are rolled out, but I want to get closer to the source of those vulnerabilities.
I think that's a great point, Karen, because we ask our developers to be experts about the domain, the thing they're building. It's very hard to be an expert about the thing you're building, say database code, and how do you write code to optimize your database interactions, and at the same time be a security expert and write that code or develop that product to be as secure as it possibly can be. So if we can give them better tools, then that might be good for overall for the industry.
So since we're talking about code, let me spin this little particular fun problem here. I'm sure everybody that listens to this podcast heard that there was an unintentional leak of some code a while back. In fact, it was Claude code that was leaked. It wasn't the models behind Claude code, but instead it was a lot of other files around like the UI and things like that was unintentionally published to a server, and some people grabbed it, and we've done a lot of podcast coverage about that. But one of the things that I think was very fascinating was the fallout from that particular publication, because one of the things that it revealed was the URL structure that Anthropic uses for publishing projects. And because someone was able to get that and dissect it, we found out last week that the Claude Mythos preview that was so dangerous that we weren't going to get access to it was actually being used by a group of hackers to create web pages. They were able to get in, see all of it, do things with it. And I will point out, just like good hackers, the reason why they were creating web pages and graphics with it was because they knew it wouldn't pop up on anybody's radar. Like it was below the scan surface. And so now there's the fallout of Anthropic claiming they have the most advanced vulnerability scanner on the planet that's too dangerous for people to use. And then we find out that some guys in Discord figured out how to use it and have been actively exploiting the exploit engine. So a little egg on the face for Anthropic, but what does this mean about security? Because these guys were not using AI to find a front door to get into Mythos. They were doing the good old fashioned work of, I wonder if they published it to this URL. Oh, wait, they did.
Because it's always the human, right?
Mhm.
Is the biggest vulnerability and the most common one.
Yeah. But we've known that for years, right? Like, think back to hackers, right? Eddie Vedder calling from accounting and he needs the number off the modem. And I will remind you that if you were old enough to get that reference, you should probably take some ibuprofen tonight because your back is hurting. But like, we've seen this year after year after year. Is, to Jack's point, AI tools make us much faster at finding these things, but they're not generating exploits out of thin air. They're still finding mistakes that humans have made. So if we know that the AI can find those mistakes faster, Karen, to your point, should we be looking for a vulnerability scanner to do that? Or should we be training AIs to fix the code problems before they happen? Because that's the whole idea behind Claude Code or Codex or any one of a number of tools that are writing code for people.
I'd say why not both? Other than, I know cost is a thing, but a lot of the sort of logic-based scanners that we've had all the years, they're usually embedded in a tool set that we already have. It's just we don't require people to use them. Like, I keep going back for decades, the number one data breach cause was SQL injection or other types of not managing your parameters correctly. And it stayed that way, literally, since I went back and looked at the very first OWASP list, and it was right there at the top. And it's only been in the last 3 or 4 years that it's moving down. So the previous OWASP list had it at number 3, and the one released last year has it at number 5. So we're kind of engineering out the bad parameters. But of course, that just means your number 2 problem gets a promotion. And now it's mostly based on misconfigured stuff, so letting people in, and as well as I think the other one was what I call the open buckets things, where people just don't secure stuff that they put somewhere for someone else to get to.
One of the things about that, Karen, is that we assume that the entire product is the source code that we create, and that's where the vulnerabilities are. But that's not the way we work in today's modern environments, particularly in containers, Java stacks, right? Where the infrastructure is not under control of the software engineer. And the software engineer, as they're developing the product, may say, this is dependent on version 12 of the library. And the way they say that is, it must be at least version 12 because I'm using features that I know weren't in version 11. And then they develop their code based on version 12, and they run that code in their environment, and then they run scanners, they run their typical source code, there's application security tools, they run static analysis and dynamic analysis in the development environment, and everything passes, and they're golden. And then they ship it to production, or DevOps takes it and puts it on the production environment. And the production environment says, I need to be at least version 12 of this library, but then it sucks in version 13. And that's where a vulnerability exists that could be chained with something that they're doing, or that's the head of the vulnerability chain, or somewhere in the middle. And then that's where the problem occurs. And you only find it in the running instance. And if you go back and look at it in the development environment, that doesn't exist because they're still using version 12, not version 13.
And my recommendation to go back in the development process wasn't to the exclusion of what we keep running. And like that whole adapt and resolve and be resilient instead of just relying on backups to get you out of a mess. I think it needs to be earlier and, of course, in production. And your particular example, I think, falls in a type of misconfiguration, because if we don't have some defined state that we're supposed to allow production to be in, and we can't detect when production drifts from that, that's something we should be doing.
Yes, but my point was, and I agree with you, my point was much more from the Mythos angle, is that a lot of what Mythos should be doing, or a lot of what we should be doing, is not only looking at vulnerabilities that are code-based, but what is actually running. And that's part of the sort of the red teaming and the automated red teaming that we want to do, is what you engineer on day 0 is not, or day 1 is not a static thing. Things change over time. Your code changes, but also your running environment changes, and we need to be able to test that, and AI tools like Mythos can help us do that.
And I think that that's a valuable use of AI because it can go out and do recon on the entire network and find the version numbers of the software that are being used. It can look up potential vulnerabilities in that software and give you a report on what is capable of being exploited. I just think that the problem is that people are way too focused on, can I break this piece of software, and not, okay, great, is any of that installed in my environment? Or if it is, here's a roadmap on how to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take. That and what Jack was saying, that think just beyond you're scanning the the part of the code base that you believe matters, but your app is more than just the code. And Karen said that too, the S3 buckets. And so what if I haven't seen anything written about this, but take something like Mythos and now you scan your CSPM. So you do point it at beyond just the code, and you start pointing it at your runtime, all the clouds you're in, and how this whole thing is being kind of consumed out there, and see what happens. So that's really interesting.
All right. So thinking back on this, obviously, to me at least, I think that while Mythos has some obvious positives, I think maybe the hype train was chugging a little faster than it should have. Also, we've now seen that no major AI provider is completely immune from having security incidents. And I don't even know if Mythos could have found this particular problem because we had no idea that it was going to grow out of a little configuration issue. If you wanted to give advice to people out there that are looking at possibly using AI as a way to augment their security posture, to do vulnerability scanning, to do remediation, what's one tip that you would give them so that they don't make any mistakes as they go down that road?
The Don't ever operate in a vacuum, right? So don't ever treat your AI as the only tool you're going to use. Don't assume that your source code is the only thing that you have to worry about. Don't assume that your running environment is the only thing you have to worry about. And don't assume that if you're looking at one piece of your environment, that there isn't a massive interaction 50 feet or 100 feet away in some other tool that you think has nothing to do with it. As Tom said, the Mythos, how people got access to Mythos was multiple things being combined, and it had to do part with the leak of the Claude code. What was that, a month ago, right? And they said, oh, it's no big deal. But that was what tipped somebody off to be able to do what they had to do today. So don't ever assume that you're operating in a vacuum, is my advice.
So you use the word rely. So that's the one I'm going to pick on, because of course, anything we rely on is fragile, even other people, even ourselves, even our own keyboard. It's a thing that this is always going to be the question for every innovation that we have. Should we rely on it? And the answer is going to be, it depends what's coming next and what can we do to mitigate. And then the big thing is, we should know how we're going to recover, because we should just expect that this is going to happen. Even if it's just an incompetent employee deleting something, it's going to happen. So we need to put as much on the detection as we do on the resolution, and have a tool set of people and tools and processes that we use.
Yeah, I just want to chime in as well to that. And as we've been doing this podcast, I've been kind of looking at, the daily developments on Mythos. And the scariest one I've seen so far in the last 15 minutes here is from Jeff Pollard at Forrester, writing, making an amazing point about this sort of understanding that nation states stockpile 0 days as a sort of Cold War. And what are, the folks in charge of those stockpiles thinking about now? Like, are they thinking that, hey, these might suddenly lose a lot of value because methods will go out and find all this stuff. So should we put them into practice sooner rather than later? So it's a very scary point.
For my part, I'll say this. The first thing you should do is very carefully evaluate any hype that you see regarding any tool out there. If you have lived through any infomercials, you know that thanks to the magic of people like Billy Mays, any tool can be made to sound amazing until you actually get to use it. And I think that that's one of the things here is that once we started putting these things into production, we realized where the pitfalls were. The second thing you need to do, though, is leverage these tools, but have a clear direction as to how you want to do that. You can't just go out and say, find these vulnerabilities for me, because you don't know what you're going to get back. Narrow your focus on how you use them. Tell it, I want you to find exploits around these areas in this particular aspect of it. And that will give you more actionable data to work on. And you're going to spend less time chasing your tail. And hopefully that it won't end up leading to some mythological problem that you might have. Thank you all for joining us on the podcast today. Before we go, where can people connect with you and continue the conversation, Karen?
I'm data chick everywhere, and I have a LinkedIn newsletter, and I'm in/Karen Lopez on LinkedIn.
I'm fortunate to have a fairly unique ASCII string for a last name, Walmarantz. So just go and type that into LinkedIn. I'll pop right up.
You can find me on my website, paradigmtechnica.com, or LinkedIn, and I also write a column for Security Boulevard.
And of course, you can find all the things that we do related to security at Tech Field Day by heading over to techfieldday.com. And you can check out Security Field Day happening April 29th and 30th. There'll be more information on the Tech Field Day website under the Security Field Day page. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application. We don't want you to miss any of the episodes. We would like it if you'd leave us a rating and a review and even leave a comment under this video, because that helps more people find what we're doing. This podcast is brought to you by Tech Field Day, the home of IT experts from across the enterprise. Tech Field Day is a part of the Future Room Group. For upcoming events, more episodes, and all the fun stuff, head over to techfieldday.com/podcast or check us out on Techstrong TV. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Future Room Group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can always find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, Techstrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Let's meet today's guest panel before we jump into the episode, starting with one of my regular co-hosts, Fernando Montenegro. Fernando, good to see you.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Spring is springing here in Canada, and the next thing I'm just hoping for is that golf courses should be opening soon. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, here's hoping that things, did they ever green up in Canada, or did they just get a slightly greener shade of white?
No, it's perfectly fine. Like, you should know that I don't think the stat is accurate. It's current, but at some point in time, the Greater Toronto area had over 200 golf courses.
Why am I not surprised? You guys definitely play hard when it's not winter. Joining us as a co-host as well this week, Mr. Jack Pollard. Jack, as always, it is a pleasure to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you both. And I can tell you here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, we haven't decided if it's winter, spring, or really summer, because, 3 days ago we had 90-degree weather, and this morning we woke up to close to a freeze. It was 34 or 35 degrees.
Well, I am Tom Hollingsworth. I live in the severe weather capital of the world, so I don't even try to figure out what the weather's going to be because it really will change in 10 minutes. But if you've got 30, we might change your mind about a couple of things on this episode of the podcast. So let's jump in. If you've been paying attention to the news for the last couple of weeks, you might have seen some very interesting notes about companies and their relationships with developers. Now, this is nothing new. There's an ecosystem out there, but one of the things that I noticed that I thought was rather interesting was that a couple of developers of some security tools unceremoniously had their accounts terminated for various reasons. And in a lot of cases, they didn't even know what the reasons were. Just off the top of my head, Microsoft yanked the developer credentials for someone who created a full disk encryption program. And his worry in the wider ecosystem was, I don't know if I can continue to update this app, which could create security problems for people who use it to encrypt their disks. And Microsoft did later reinstate his credentials. But over the past weekend, as we're recording this, there was another incident where Anthropic yanked all Claude access for a company based on, I believe what they said was unusual usage patterns. I don't know how unusual consuming billions of tokens can be, but okay, sure. So for this episode of Security Boulevard, I wanted to explore the security aspects of what happens when developer relationships go south.
So let's get started, right? I think that there's two schools of thought, right? There's the people who say don't put all of your eggs in one basket, and there are those who say put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket, right? So I think that both approaches are viable. What we see here, like my kids hate when I use the expression risk management. Sorry, kids, right? But this is exactly what this is, right? As a whether you are a CISO or a CTO in a company, and you are building out your capabilities, what's your fallback plan, right? What happens when something goes like? How do you plan ahead to what happens when something goes awry? How do you recover, right? And you have to think these things through. So this is a perfect example of that, I think.
Well, I also think it's really a mismatch of expectations, and it's risk. You're talking about risk management. I think part of this is expectation management, particularly on the part of the vendors. There's a lot of vendors here that are getting a lot of revenue, and in fact, the majority of their revenue from these types of tools. For instance, Anthropic's majority of revenue is almost assuredly coming from things like Claude Code, and yet they're treating their customers as if they are generic freebie users or consumer users who might have paid a few dollars for the service. When a company is paying you $100, $200 a month per user, or even $20 a month per user for the smaller things like my company does for me, we expect a certain level of service, the ability to call and get somebody to support us, and not to have our account terminated without having a conversation with the vendor. And I think, and I understand that on a consumer side, you're giving free accounts away and you have 500 million or a billion accounts. You may terminate accounts automatically, and you may do that with fraud detection, stuff like that. But when I'm paying for the service, I don't expect you to terminate my account and never tell me why and have no feedback and no recourse. And so that expectation management from the vendors need to understand that companies, this is not an add-on anymore. Just like Zoom or telecommunications and email isn't an add-on anymore. And we need to be able to have support and clear lines of communication and not have things terminated without an understanding.
I think one of the challenges that people face, though, is like you said, Jack, it feels like a lot of these things kind of come out of nowhere. Is there a process inside of a company for an escalation, right? Because like we see that a lot in other places. I'll just use things like bandwidth overages at your home, for example. If you go over once, they'll be like, okay, don't do that again because things are weird sometimes. But if it's a consistent pattern, then they can say either, we're going to start charging you additionally, or this technically violates our terms of service. You see that a lot when you're doing things you're not supposed to, like file sharing or something along those lines. And they're well within their rights from their terms of service to do an account termination. But I think that kind of coming back to what you said is very important. Where in the terms of service does it say how they're going to handle that? Because when it comes down to fighting this, that big long thing that you scroll to the bottom of and click accept in order to get access to the cool tool is exactly where they're going to come back to you. And we've seen lots of funny things that get buried in there. Like, there are no warnings. If you do any of the following behaviors, you'll be immediately terminated. You cannot take us to court. You must seek arbitration in order to be able to dispute anything like that. And we all know that arbitration is only slightly slower than the US court system when it comes to legal outcomes. But the ultimate problem that people face is once they get locked out of these things, there's no recourse, no immediate recourse, at least, right? So I think about something like, I'm a user of the Apple ecosystem. So a lot of the software that I have is tied to my Apple ID. If for some reason Apple decided to shut off my ID tomorrow, I would be in a world of hurt because almost all of the things that I own and I do are tied to that ID. And even if I start the appeals process, there's no guarantee I'm going to get that back, let alone in a reasonable amount of time. Can companies find a way to go back to what Fernando said, kind of put some of their eggs in a different basket in the hopes that it won't be a catastrophic failure if they get locked out?
The challenge of putting your eggs in multiple baskets is that creates a tremendous amount of overhead that you have to use multiple different tools. And if you have somebody who's well down the path of, say, the Claude Code environment, and they understand it and they're a power user and they're doing all their stuff with it, and now you have a different person who's now well on their way with Codex, now they can't necessarily cross-pollinate with each other. They can't give advice. And then you have two different billing and two different sets of bills, two different this, two different that, or multiple this, multiple that. And then when one of them gets cut off, are you actually able to switch to the other vendor or provider, right? It's the same thing we have in the cloud. If I'm using AWS and I'm using Azure, some of the stuff is very obvious, like anything that talks S3 protocol, you can very quickly port. But if you're tied into the way Microsoft does and manages Kubernetes, it may not work the same way on Amazon or Google, right? Everything's got their own flavor. And so the switching cost to be, even if you're just the switching cost of thinking of it as a backup and an alternate, and hey, these guys locked me out, now I'm going to go over here. That's a very hard pill to swallow. And it's also because then you also have to say, do I maintain two completely separate environments and half of my team is on this environment, half of my team is on that environment? Or do I say I have to have double the cost and all of my teams are in both environments and now I'm paying for both of them? And I don't think that's a good way to run your business either.
No, I agree, and I love that you brought up cloud, because the guidance that like we were all around the early days of cloud, and people were, oh no, we're going to have multiple clouds, and the general guidance has always been specialize in one cloud, deliver in one cloud on a per project basis. Now, large organization, by virtue of it's a multi-cloud, becomes an emergent property because Department A chooses one cloud, Department B may choose another, Department C ends up another one. And oh, by the way, we just did M&A and acquired a company that's running on yet another cloud, right? So multi-cloud has always been sort of this emergent property. And but I think that there is a couple of things we can poke at here. One of them is that it doesn't necessarily mean that we should automatically duplicate and do it on something else. It's what is your threat model? What does your threat model says about this condition, right? So, for example, I'm here at home. We have a the joke is that so I run most of my company finances, but my wife knows exactly where the accounts are, right? And we have a separate piece of paper with credentials and other things, right? That is the fallback, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that that she's doing some and I'm doing some. The fallback is we did think this through, and there is a fallback, right? So in the context of these incidents, I guess that the point is, as we are increasingly depending on these services, right? Are we thinking through the failure conditions? Are we thinking through, okay, look, maybe I have maybe I have 60 accounts that are the $20 level, whatever, but I have one account that is $1,000 a month, and that is my guaranteed, we have access to somebody type of account that I can escalate things to. Almost like a pilot, not a pilot like quite, but an emergency account, right? But I guess that you also raised a really good point, is that people expect it is expectation management in a way, and we're all dealing with this frustration of the high automation that we see everywhere. Airlines, telephone companies, power utilities, right? Everyone is automating all the things away, and we're automating away customer service. Oh yes, we're going to run customer service bots to help you. No, it's not the same thing, right? So I guess that the broader point here is that there is a customer service dimension to this, and there is a risk management dimension to this.
The other thing that I think we need to consider, especially when it comes to software development and security, is that a lot of the functions that people are using to get access are restricted to people with registered accounts. So like I don't want people randomly developing disk encryption software for my operating system without using my approved methods of doing it. Because if I do, I open myself up to a massive legal liability when someone creates a rogue tool that wipes your disk because, oh, I thought I was trying to help. And we see this a lot in development for other like mobile operating systems, right? Like I think the iOS, Apple iOS is the standard here, where you have to play by the Apple developer rules to be able to publish software to the App Store for mobile devices. And we saw about a month ago a rash of people having their apps delisted from the iPhone and iPad App Store because they violated Apple's prohibition of vibe coding, basically. It wasn't specifically about vibe coding. It was about apps that modify operating systems or something like that. But another thing that we ran into when the Mac App Store was first debuted was a lot of people were like, well, I don't necessarily want to publish my app to the Mac App Store because like there are rules about how it has to be sandboxed and it can't do anything in other like operating system places because it has to be self-contained. And that is hard for developers because on the one hand, I have this idea for this app that I want to build. But on the other hand, in order to get it published, I have to play by these rules. And if somebody wakes up tomorrow and decides, well, you know what, I don't want you to have that, you literally could effectively end the ability of that app to do anything. And that's hard when you've built your entire company on, I don't know, like, you know, API access to something and suddenly a company shuts down their API. Like, what am I going to do now?
So you bring up a very interesting point, which is, and it's unclear for me from what I've read so far about these accounts having problems and being terminated or losing access, are the violations for interaction with the service, or are the violations about the product that the user is actually creating? So if the violation is in terms of service, i.e., I'm hammering and overloading the server, I can understand why the company says, I don't want you to be my customer anymore, right? I'm firing you as a customer because you're putting too much of a burden for how much you're paying me on my system. So that's sort of, I look at that as one problem. The other problem is the service provider, the Claude Code or whoever it is, Apple, in your case, Tom, are they looking at what I'm doing and limiting my ability to write the code the way I want to write it to do what I want to do? So it's different if I'm writing that code and publishing it on the App Store, or if I'm writing that code for my own private use and not publishing it. Like I want an app on my phone just for me, and I want it to do whatever I want it to do. Like I want to write my own encryption code, or I want to explore how that works in Apple. There should absolutely be they should not be looking at what my code is doing because it doesn't affect their service until I decide to get their approval, their blessing. Right. So from a security perspective, I don't want the service provider, whether it's Apple or Claude or, Anthropic or Microsoft or whoever, just like Microsoft doesn't read my Word files that I put in there, I don't want them going in there and saying, I can't use 4-letter words. I can't use, profanity in my documents, and I lose my access if I say write profanity in my documents. I do that all the time. They also shouldn't be reading my code and saying, hey, you can't write encryption code. Come on, that's so from a security perspective, we also need to be sure about what those terms of service are saying and what they're doing. And I find the second problem of them potentially saying, we don't like what the product you're developing is doing, and therefore you can't do it anymore. That to me is a little concerning.
Yeah, this is a slippery slope because we get into this definition of these restrictions to define behavior, and we can go about like how credit card companies don't accept some types of businesses, and we get into a whole socioeconomical uh, uh, discussion that I think it's interesting, but I think it's far from where most people are concerned with from a cybersecurity angle. But but you are right. Like, what if where do you split that difference between what you actually see versus what you're supposed to do, right? But I keep going back to, I think that the practical scenario for our listeners and viewers is, have you thought about this as a condition? What do you want to do when the time comes? If the time ever comes, what's your response? We all know that from an instant response perspective, the worst time to plan instant response is during an incident, right? So, what is your break glass scenario in case something's it's never going to happen? Okay, that's a decision you are making. It's interesting because when we were talking about this, I'm thinking back in the earliest days of the pandemic, right? Uh, Here in our family, we made a few strategic decisions, right? And one of them was, okay, we are going to cover things that might go wrong in the world, right? Up to uh, power loss, right? So I don't mean to talk too much about this, but like we bought an extra freezer so we could have extra food, right? But we didn't. We made the risk management decision of, okay, we're not buying a new generator, right? Uh, so what is the similar decision that your organization needs to make in relation to third-party dependencies, right? If your entire company depends on a provider like Anthropic or OpenAI or whomever it is, right, or Microsoft or Amazon, or right, what is your fallback plan? It doesn't mean that it may be a risk management decision where you accept the risk, but then, well, you accept the risk, but you have to have this conversation either proactively. You do this, or you should ask your people what is their dependency, right? So to bring economics into this is the principal agent problem of economics, right? When an agent, I don't mean AI agent, I mean economic agent, right? When do you how do you oversee what someone is doing, right? If an employee comes to you and says, or a CTO comes to the board and says, oh yeah, we're vibe coding everything with Claude, it's the board's responsibility to say, okay, what happens if Anthropic fails? What happens if the price for tokens jumps 5x, right? And that CTO better have an answer. But again,
So
it's a risk management decision.
you bring up an interesting point, and I go back a little bit to what I said about expectation management. When we first started shifting a lot of our work effort and workload to the cloud, there was an assumption that the cloud is an always on resource, and the cloud has essentially infinite reliability, right? It doesn't lose your data. Yeah, but early on, there was this assumption, right? Because, you know, in the early days of the cloud, think back 15, 20 years ago, we were thinking about things like hard drive failures was the primary cause of data loss, right? Now we understand, 20 years on, we understand that even though the cloud has reliability of the physical storage, whether it's, on a spinning disk or flash or whatever. It doesn't really matter. We don't know. We don't care. We still have to back up our data that's in the cloud because there are many other causes of data loss, right? And I think here you're right, that we need to think about this a lot in the risk management of not only the vibe coding vendors we're dependent on, but what happens with our code storage, our code repository with GitHub, right? Is the same type of thing. If GitHub locks us out, what does that mean? If our account gets taken over and we're doing private development, not open source, and our private code repository gets made public. In fact, I think that's similar to what essentially what happened to Claude was that its code got made public because somebody did the wrong thing in their GitHub repository. So all of these things, you're right, are very much a risk management decision. And I think it leads to this concept. We don't really understand how quickly we become dependent on these things and how important they are to us. And therefore, we don't understand the threat model and the risk to our organizations.
And I think that the evolution, and yes, right. And I think that I keep the soapbox, the hill that I will keep charging is that we are maturing. We're helping this industry evolve and become more mature. Well, part of that maturity is having this increased uh, thinking about resilience and oversight and what are we doing? Is it exciting kind of thing? Probably not. Is it something that is required of a mission critical system for your organization? Absolutely yes. Right. So these are all examples of how you do this, and whether you're talking about um, how you improve your threat modeling from a application perspective, whether you improve your risk management, enterprise risk management, whether you're improving your third-party risk management program, right? How well are you working with your third parties to not just the typical cybersecurity risk, but this kind of business risk as well, right? So this is all an evolution that it's not flashy, but it's absolutely critical.
The other thing I'll say here is that we are, to quote another one of Fernando's favorite economic terms, we are using this as ceteris paribus. Everything else has stayed the same. But we know for a fact that these things don't stay the same. And one of the things that has caught a lot of people off guard in recent years is changes to terms of service, changes to developer guidelines that seemingly come out of nowhere. And that's not just from a model of, suddenly these things are banned in the terms of service, but back when HashiCorp decided to make Terraform a different form of license, and that meant that they could charge for certain parts and not for others. Or when companies like Adobe introduce things in their EULA that say that we can use your work to train our AI, like that creates another security hole of, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, it's an unknown unknown. We didn't know that this was going to change, and we don't know how to deal with it because we never would have considered that it could.
Well, but that's the thing, right? I mean, we are. I politely disagree with the classification of this as an unknown unknown. If you are a leader, if you are a technology or a security leader in an organization, right? You, uh, I think that the significant, if not total, number of people in this are adults who understand the world and understand how contracts are written and understand how at some level how the law works and uh, how contract law works and so if you don't, that's totally fine, right? But you should learn, right? I think that the bigger point here is that we are asking, as this becomes more critical, we are asking for a more worldly view of how technology fits into everything we do.
Well, I think it's really a bit of both of what you're saying. It's really both the unknown unknown and the known unknowns, right? So we have a known unknown of, we know we're dependent on this, but we haven't gone beyond we're dependent on it. We have the unknown unknown because, and I hate to use this term, but I think it's very, very important here. We have a whole bunch of shadow IT going on here, particularly with AI. And we have a lot of people who are doing stuff, who are becoming dependent on this stuff in a shadow version of it, where it's not an official company contract. It's on the personal credit card, the personal account, et cetera. And that's a whole big security ball of wax, just from a data perspective and a data security perspective. But in the context here, what we're talking about is, it's really an unknown dependency. It's an unknown unknown because we don't know what we're dependent upon until it disappears and all of a sudden it breaks. And then we find out the hard way.
But just go ahead, real quickly, I want to make a point about that, Jack, talking about shadow IT. You can create a situation that you unintentionally don't realize. A friend of mine in the industry just signed up for a Claude Code Teams account. And one of the things, though, is that if anybody in his organization had been using their work email address to use Claude Code prior to that, that Teams account locks that account out and forces them to transfer over to the managed team organization one, because it uses the same domain for everything. And he was like, yeah, I'm about to find out which of my people were doing this without me knowing it, because they're about to get locked out of their accounts. You can create an unknown through actions that you didn't think had an intentional consequence.
Yeah, I'll pick on the, is this really unknown, right? If you're modeling this, is this I think to Jack's classification, this is a known unknown, right? If you work in technology, right, or if you are leading an organization, you know that shadow whatever, I don't like the term either, Jack, like, you know that shadow whatever is a term, right? That is an ongoing challenge in your governance program, right? So when you are presenting to your board, right, you are defining your security program and you are saying, look, this is everything that we're doing, right? And we acknowledge that there is a shadow AI, or I'm going to say AI because we're talking about there is a shadow IT, shadow AI component that we're dealing with. The way that we are handling this is that our governance program is such that this shadow capability here, like I'm using hand tapping, this shadow capability here does not materially impact our organization. If the shadow capability materially impacts your organization, I'm sorry, but you have bigger problems to worry about, right? That's I think that I go back to I go back to breaches that we've had in the past, about whether it's the incident that happened with SolarWinds, whether it's a CrowdStrike incident, right? These things are they are not unknowns, right? SolarWinds maybe, but like you need to plan for these, right? You need to go on a whiteboard and, okay, what are the failure conditions that this can happen? You do second order thinking. Okay, if this fails, then what? If that fails, then what? That's part of building a more robust program. Sorry.
No, in one sense, I agree with you, Fernando. In the other sense, I think about it is that this is a flavor of both the unknown unknown and the known unknown. But it's also a flavor of how we think about things in traditional security versus zero trust, right? Which is what we're talking about here is some organizations are going to, like in zero trust, we assume breach. Some organizations are going to assume shadow IT is happening, and then they're going to say, given that it's happening, what do we do about it? And there are other organizations going to say, no, it isn't happening, or we've got a governance plan in place to prevent it from happening. And then when it does happen, they've got a problem, just like if you assume breaches never happen and then they happen, you've got a problem.
I love when you bring up these the things that we think through about when you were discussing this. One of the things that came to my mind was if people are familiar with the Kinefin framework, Cynefin is a word for Welsh, I believe. I'm pronouncing it wrong, for habitat. And it's a phenomenal framework created by, I believe it was Dave Snowden at IBM in the early mid 2000s, about sense making, about what kind of problems you are dealing with, right? There are problems in the world that are very, very simple. There's a very clear relationship between cause and effect. There are problems in the world where the relationship between cause and effect is not simple, but it's somewhat linear. There are problems where there is no direct relationship and you have to experiment. And there are problems when there is absolutely no relationship and you're trying to just get out of there as soon as you can. I'm thinking about this because what you just described, we didn't think there could be a breach, and there was one, right? Or we didn't think there would be shadow X, and there is some, right? Is a known failure condition in that model because you think that it worked. There was a very simple relationship between cause and effect. Turns out there isn't. How do you respond, right? So I encourage people to look it up. Cynefin is spelled Cynefin, right? So that's my random trivia for the episode, right?
Well, I got to say, what I take from this though is a lesson that, as an analyst, I talk to a lot of vendors and I help
Yeah.
vendors position. I talk to a lot of CISOs, but I think we are very focused in vendor world on the very specific problems we're solving. And CISOs are very downward focused in bits and bytes and little, turning the knobs. And we need to be thinking at a much higher level and do the strategic stuff. And my hope is that the AI that we're bringing into bear on these problems will provide the bandwidth to the leadership to be able to focus on these strategic questions, these what if questions, the tabletop exercises, the gaming, so that we can figure out exactly how we best protect our particular enterprise.
100%. And the only thing I'll say is that yes, let's use AI to help with this, but let's make sure we don't depend just on one AI. Right?
I think it's important for people to understand that they have to explore all of these opportunities to see where the failure points can lie and have a way to address them so that they show up in a risk profile. Because we all know that when we go before the stakeholders, if we don't have a proper risk number associated with this, they're not going to listen to anything we have to say. But you should listen to the things that these two gentlemen have to say. Fernando, what have you got coming up that people should be looking for?
So I'm working on it. It is 2026, so all things agentic. So I'm working on some research around better definitions for agentic security. So that should be out in a couple of weeks, a little more. But other than that, we just published our SASE, Secure Access Service Edge signal that you and I worked on, and I have a refresh of the security operations signal in my radar. The other thing is I'm deep into some of the quantitative work we do, so some market sizing and some survey data. That's the spreadsheet open on the other window right now, right? And that should be out in a few weeks too.
I am sort of knee deep in understanding AI's impact on both development and the application security as an application development, as well as in the SOC. How we're going about doing the AI-driven SOC, which is somewhat of a misnomer and it's a little bit weird. So I'm trying to figure that out. And then prepping for next week is a security field day where I will be seeing both of you gentlemen in person.
So nice. I'm so looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And we look forward to an opportunity for everyone to kind of get together at Security Field Day. As a matter of fact, we hope that you'll join us on Thursday, April the 30th, because we're going to be doing a live recording of the Security Boulevard podcast. I'm going to get Fernando and Jack to join me, and we might even have an extra special guest that day. We'll see what happens. But if you want to learn more about that and all the other things related to Security Field Day, head over to techfieldday.com and check out all of the things on the schedule. But for now, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of Security Boulevard. If you enjoyed this conversation, go over to YouTube or open up your favorite podcast app. We want you to subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes. We also would appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, whatever. Whatever you do will make us so much more visible to all the other people out there. This podcast is brought to you by securityboulevard.com and the Future Room Group. If you want to check out the show notes and see other episodes, go over to securityboulevard.com, the Techstrong TV website, or the Techstrong TV app. Those are all your favorite places to get our content. Also follow Security Boulevard on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Look for Security BLVD. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see everyone next week.